periods, and temperatures in the southwest maybe up to 21, perhaps 22 in London. Elsewhere, again, we're mostly in the high teens, but the breezes will be lighter. Quite a chilly start to Wednesday. For many, a fine bright start. Some showers again over northern England, but out west the cloud is gathering and we will see outbreaks of rain pushing in here as we go through the afternoon. Sunny spells and a few scattered showers elsewhere, and again temperatures mostly high teens, low 20s at best.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed boilers, proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Hi, I'm Dan Wootton. You can watch me live on GB News Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. And did you know that you can also watch and listen live on our website, gbnews.com. You'll always be up to date on the latest breaking news, as well as enjoying the best stories, opinions and shows. You can even join the debate under our live player as you're watching. So head straight to gbnews.com on TV, radio and online. GB News, Britain's news channel.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, "Nana, stop arguing." I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Good evening and welcome to Dewbs & Co with me, Michelle Dewberry. So tonight it's Martin Dawdney, so of course it's Dewbs & Co. Coming up on tonight's show, as it emerges the Rhodes wildfires were started by arsonists and not climate change, I'll be asking, why is the media so addicted to climate disaster doom? Next, after voters rejected ULEZ in Uxbridge, should the Tories do a U-turn on green policies to win back the next general election? And do you trust them? Next, with Labour pledging to make it easier for trans people to self-identify, should the culture wars be at the heart of the next election also? And lastly, councillors in Orkney are so fed up of Scotland, they're plotting to divorce the UK and to become an outpost of Norway. And is the UK becoming increasingly more fragmented? All of that to come with me, Martin Daubney. But first, here's the latest news headlines.
Martin, thank you. The top story on GB News tonight, as you've been hearing, the BBC has issued an apology to Nigel Farage over its reporting about the closure of his Coutts bank account. The BBC's business editor, Simon Jack, has within the last hour said the broadcaster's information came from a trusted and senior source, but it turned out to be incomplete and inaccurate. Mr Farage lodged a formal complaint about the BBC after it reported he lacked the funds needed to hold open an account with Coutts. He has since welcomed the apology and says he's grateful. NatWest Group CEO Dame Alison Rose was forced to apologise to Nigel Farage last week for the mishandling of his account closure. Well, Conservative MP and GB News presenter Jacob Rees-Mogg says she has questions to answer nonetheless.
Why is it that the BBC is always a few days late? The BBC really ought to have given this apology when it first emerged that they'd been sold a pup by a, quote, source, unquote, at NatWest, and they should have corrected it immediately. But this is characteristic of the torpor with which the BBC operates. If Dame Alison has broken this, she must go, and therefore she must answer the question, was she the source for the BBC?
Jacob Rees-Mogg, where you can watch Nigel Farage's full reaction to that apology tonight on his programme. That's coming up in an hour's time. Now, on to Greece, and the tour operator TUI has today cancelled all outbound flights to Rhodes up until Friday and including Friday as those wildfires continue to spread rapidly right across the island. Nearly 1,500 tourists have been flown home in the biggest mass evacuation of its kind as the fires burn for a sixth day. Jet2 and TUI both announced 4 repatriation flights today. EasyJet and TUI have another plan for tomorrow. Here, the Foreign Office is saying between 7,000 and 10,000 Britons are currently on the island, and the Prime Minister today says Britons are being supported. Meanwhile, the Greek government says there are currently no fires reported in residential areas of Corfu, despite evacuation orders being issued there last night. Some of those who managed to get on a flight to East Midlands Airport today told GB News what they saw as they left.
You could see smoke in the distance, probably a couple of miles away from where we was in the hotel. And that had gradually got worse throughout the night. And as the darker it got, we could see the glow of the fire.
Suddenly it was like the ash was falling all over, all onto the beach and the taverna, all over the tables, and we wondered, you know, sort of quite what was happening. And then we looked over the back of us over the hills, and all the sky was alight.
Here, Michael Gove has announced plans to create more homes in the UK's main cities by relaxing planning rules and, he says, cutting red tape. The Housing Secretary says he wants to make it easier to convert empty shops into new flats, for example, and extend existing homes. The plans will include creating an urban quarter in Cambridge, plans which were immediately dismissed by the local MP, Anthony Brown, as nonsense. Well, it all comes amid criticism. The government has failed to hit its target to build 300,000 new homes annually. Israel's parliament has passed a controversial law which will limit the powers of the judiciary, despite months of nationwide protests. The new legislation removes the power of the Supreme Court to overrule the government. Opposition lawmakers shouted shame and left the Parliament building in protest of the law's passing. It's all part of a series of judicial reforms put forward by the Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's far-right coalition government. Here, train drivers are threatening fresh industrial action at the height of the summer holidays with a further ban on overtime. Members of the ASLEF union won't work extra hours from Monday the 7th to the 12th of August. The union claims none of the train companies employs enough drivers. It's going to be the 5th week-long ban on overtime since May. The latest one ended on Saturday. Another is due to start on July the 31st. A former advisor to Boris Johnson has become the youngest peer to enter the House of Lords. Charlotte Owen, who's only 30 years old, was nominated to enter the Lords in the former Prime Minister's controversial resignation honours list released in June. She'll be known as Baroness Owen of Alderley Edge and will sit as a Conservative peer. Britain's first £1 million footballer, Trevor Francis, has died at the age of 69 after a heart attack. He joined Nottingham Forest in 1979, helping them win back-to-back European Cups. That hasn't been repeated by a British team, including scoring the winning goal against Malmo. He played 52 times for his country before taking to management, where he guided Sheffield Wednesday and Birmingham to major finals. Gary Lineker has been leading the tributes today, calling him a wonderful footballer and a lovely man. You're up to date on TV, online, DAB+ radio and the TuneIn app. This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
Thanks for the update, Polly. Welcome to Dewbs & Co with me, Martin Dewberry. So now it's Dewbs & Co. Joining me until 7 is my panel, PR consultant Alex Dean and former advisor to Jeremy Corbyn, James Schneider. Good evening, gentlemen. Don't forget, you can get in touch with us all the usual ways, gbviews@gbnews.com or, of course, on Twitter @GBNews. So to our top story tonight. The Greek government has declared a severe fire risk in almost half of its landmass. British holidaymakers on the Isle of Rhodes continue to flee the hellish conditions that the wildfires have caused. But, spoiler alert, the Rhodes Fire Department has admitted the fires, quotes, were started by human hands. So, if arsonists were responsible, why is the doom-mongering media constantly overhyping the so-called climate crisis angle on this? Alex, I'm going to start with you. Fascinating when you look into the history of Greek fires. Every single fire from 2007, arson. 2009, arson. 2012, arson. 2018, arson. You get the picture. This year, the same again. So these are crimes started by human hands that happen routinely. And yet, why do we have this constant narrative of talking up the end of the world as we know it through climate change?
Well, it certainly suits the current narrative, which largely goes unchallenged, to say this is because of that. Whereas actually, as the Greeks are telling us themselves, and God, you've got to feel for the landowners, the people whose properties are threatened by this, people whose lives are threatened by this. The Greeks are telling us that it is a case of arson, at least this most recent one. Clearly, the Rhodes Fire Department reporting in that far-right conspiracy theory-minded newspaper, The Mirror, which I'm looking at, reports that the Rhodes Fire Department says that the heat wave is down to being started by people. More broadly, though, let's broaden it out. The European Forest Fire Information Service, which publishes regular and politically neutral, obviously, data, says that fires are no worse this year than in past years. So, you might be fooled if you're watching the news into thinking this is some extraordinary year of difference. Actually, on the data, it's not. But on longer term and global basis, I looked at some data from the Royal Society, which showed that from the year 2000 onwards, fires globally are down in terms of the footprint they cover globally by about a quarter. So whilst the narrative people might wish to pursue is that the world is on fire, it seems the data suggests that's not the case.
Mr. Schneider, I can hear you grating your teeth there. There is some merit there, isn't there? The facts are the facts. The media likes to propagate the narrative the world is burning because it's the topic du jour, but the data is the data. This is started by humans.
Well, the fire department said that fires are set by human hands in general terms and they're going to investigate. And, of course, the impact of having day after day, almost week after week of over 40 degrees temperatures and the way the winds are going in a particular way to expand that fire, of course, should be looked into. But it seems to me on the face of it, the fact that they're having 40-degree heat wave that lasts much longer than they do beforehand seems tied to climate change. But going to the larger issue, are we over-focusing on the climate crisis? No, we are hugely under-focusing on the climate crisis.
How can you say that when all we ever talk about is the climate crisis?
Well, if only it were. Let me lay out a few things. So, at the moment, there is the heat wave in Europe, the simultaneous droughts.
There's one here.
Well, I know because we're not in that weather system, but that's how weather systems work. But in Europe, there is. In China, there's a record-breaking drought. In the US, they've had that. They've had almost wet bulb temperatures in South Asia. And this follows the same thing happening last year, where the Yangtze River in China, for example, dried up in places. We had the same thing in Germany. It damaged trade when the Rhine was too small. The temperature in the North Atlantic, every single day since the 1st of April this year has been the highest it has ever been on record, and it is and it is going up. The impact of these things cumulatively on our lives is already big, and is potentially much more dramatic. And if you look at if you look at not the doomsday stuff, if you look at the direction of travel of where the science is
hang on. Okay, let Alex,
tipping points and what the
let Alex get a word in now, because look, the fact of the matter is, people like you are called climate change deniers. None of us, we all know that the climate has always changed. Isn't it that just what's happening?
No, I believe that the climate is changing, and I believe that man affects the climate in the way that it changes. And indeed, climate change may make fire more likely in certain places and at certain times, which was your point about heat making it more likely that this takes place. But what we're seeing with this, at least this story about fires in Greece, is that we're not actually having more fires globally or in Europe than we have done historically. Certainly that study I mentioned from the Royal Society papers, since 2000, that's good data. It's 23 years worth of data, which suggests the number of fires we have, or the amount of fire we have in the world has gone down in forest fires. And of course is due at least as much on this data from arson as anything else. So if I go from the broad data to the specific, before we were on air, Nana had an interview with about as grounded an interviewee as you can find. It was a volunteer Greek firefighter who, is a guy who's gone out from his town to try and help them put out the fires. He said, I can see the propane bottles that people were using, whether it was for barbecues or more sinister outcomes, were using in the forest that started the fires that I'm trying to put out.
And it's worth bringing at this point some of the historic fires that were started by human hands in Greece, including in 2018, they were started in 2021, beg your pardon. They were started deliberately as an organised criminal activity. There's huge allegations of corruption at a governmental level. And another thing is that practically nobody gets penalised or prosecuted for arson in Greece. It's like 2.8%.
And
surely we should be getting tougher on arson rather than pretending it's the climate change.
OK, but no one is suggesting that if someone starts a fire that they shouldn't be prosecuted. Of course that's the case. And the Greek authorities aren't saying that. They're saying that we'll have an investigation and investigations in full swing and we'll make announcements.
But just said every fire in living memory is an act of arson.
But if you're trying to use the fact that there is some arson in Greece to not worry about...
Well, every major fire.
So let's take an organisation that's not it's not pushing an alarmist agenda, or as you might call it, Zurich, an insurance agency, an insurance company, has a projection that by mid-century, in 25 years' time, there will be 1 billion people displaced from where they live.
You don't think an insurance company might have an agenda to make people take out insurance against fire?
Each year, for the last few years, the number of people displaced globally is increasing. This year is the largest year on record, 110 million. That's driving flows of refugees. There are causes to these things, and to just say, oh no, this little isolated thing over here, you can't change the fact that, for example, in March last year, it was 30 degrees in both the North and the South Pole, that the scale of melting of the Greenland ice sheet or the West Antarctic ice sheet is extremely worrying.
OK, it came out actually this week that about 400,000 years ago, Greenland was completely ice-free.
Of course it was.
Proving that this whole thing is cyclical. Alex,
I worry that this conversation is basically on tram lines, where people are pursuing paths that don't actually intersect to the point of being a useful conversation. Part of that reason, may I say, is that you're being reasonable. Because some people look at this and say, look, I see fire, therefore this must be because of climate change. That's not a fallacy that you've avoided. It's not a fallacy you've fallen into. But it's so easy to look at these fires on our television screens and say, with your teenage eyes filled with tears, and say, the world is on fire because of climate change. That, at least, is not the case. And I'm glad that there are at least some channels willing to have that discussion.
Right, Alex James James. That's it for round one. OK, our Don't Kill Cash GB News campaign has had now over 200,000 signatures. The petition is on our website, gbnews.com/cash. Or if you've got a smartphone, use it right now to click on the QR code on your screen. There it is to take you to the petition. Help GB News with our campaign and tell the authorities, don't kill cash. OK, up next, rumours abound that the Tories could U-turn on banning petrol and diesel cars before the next election. Does that get your vote? Stay with us.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Monday to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, no, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to Dewbs & Co with me, Martin Dewberry, or is it Dewbs & Co? Keeping me company until 7 o'clock. PR consultant Alex Dean and former advisor to Jeremy Corbyn, James Schneider. Well, you've been getting in touch in your droves on that previous debate we just had. Climate emergency or arson on the roads fires. This is an excellent comment from Graham. As a former fireman, I can confirm that 99% of bushfires are down to twisted arsonists. All of southern Europe gets tinder dry every year. These fires do not start naturally, and that's from a firefighter. Martin says this, not me. Martin, I can't help thinking these fires are started by environmentalists to keep climate change at the top of the agenda. That might be an overreach, but anyway, that's just out there. Joan, trees don't spontaneously ignite. Fact, this is arson. And for a bit of balance, Andy said, just because a fire is started by a human hand, the conditions for it to become a widespread wildfire are tinder-dry conditions and strong winds. So it's odd of you, Martin, to discount climate change as a factor in these cases. That's what we like, a nice bit of balance. And don't forget, coming up after Dewbs & Co, we've got Nigel Farage, the exclusive inside line on that BBC apology he got this afternoon. Moving on to our next story now. The government is backing away from their unpopular green policies in a bid to win the next election. Rishi Sunak says the government's target of hitting net zero emissions by 2050 must not impose unnecessary costs. Well, we saw in Uxbridge that ULEZ means you lose. So is it time for the Tories to do a net zero U-turn to help them win the general election? Alex, start with you. First of all, is it a good idea? Is it simply reactionary to a recent by-election victory? And more to the point, do you trust them as far as you can throw them?
Well, there's not anything wrong with saying when the facts change, I change my mind. And I think it's good to try to be honest and reflective of things. I did my fair share of campaigning in Uxbridge, as I imagine James did too. I can tell you there was no huge wave of affection for my party. It was because of ULEZ that the Conservative Party won that by-election. And despite the fact the Labour candidate locally, completely understandably, ditched the policy, said it was wrong and tried to take a different stance to the stance that his the mayor in London, Sadiq Khan, has. So ULEZ show that you can have a partisan advantage on these issues, and hitherto the main parties have broadly been in lockstep. People have always said about the UK, it's good that climate change is not a debate over which there's a partisan difference. Well, here we've seen an advantage gained by my party, by there being one. And I must say that the most important thing at the next election will be how much of the red wall the Conservative Party can hang on to. So I think that there are two things, while still trying to remain credible. The Conservative Party, because it's been in this position for so long on climate change, there are two things the Conservative Party could do between now and the next election that would be rational and help it electorally. The first would be to change the restriction on cars being banned by 2030 to match the European commitment. The Europeans have shifted their deadline to 2035. Why put ourselves at a competitive disadvantage for a relatively short period of time, which, to a point I'd like to know James's view on, of course, is something that would harm those comparatively the least well-off in society by banning combustible engines. And the second thing, of course, that we could at least do is continue to extract from the North Sea, to grant new licences. There is a clear point of difference between the Conservative Party and Labour. Starmer says he won't grant new licences. The Conservative Party say that we should. And I just point out that if we extracted all that we possibly could from everything that's known in the North Sea and did it all at once, we'd still be more than meeting our IPCC targets.
Right, so James, I'm going to cut to you. So this is about having a wedge issue, a point of difference. As Alex said there, a lot of people can't tell the difference between the Tories and the Labour Party anymore. A clear difference on ULEZ. The Tories are seeing an opportunity. This is something that will go down well, because while the principle of saving the planet, of course, we all agree with, the cost, the personal cost to households is what's hurting people and making them reconsider. Electorally, this is canny politics, isn't it?
So I want the Conservative Party to lose the next election and be punished for running the country extremely badly for the last 13 years. So if they did do this, I would be happy in electoral terms, because currently there aren't really very many dividing lines between Labour and the Tories, and this would create one. And this would.
You think this would help Labour?
Yeah, of course. If the next election is fought on, do you want to do things on the cost of living climate crisis, or do you not want to do things on the cost of living climate crisis? That is going to work to Labour's advantage. Now,
it didn't in Uxbridge.
Well, of course, but in Uxbridge, what are the circumstances we've got? We've got a policy that hasn't come in yet, so more people think it's going to impact them than they are. It's going to impact 1 in 10 cars, and in London, about half of households have cars. So most people actually aren't going to be impacted.
But the poorest are impacted the worst.
Hold on. And it's in one city. The read across to the rest of the country, I really don't think.
There's clean air zones in Birmingham, Newcastle,
I
Norwich,
really don't think
Edinburgh.
works.
So, hang on, I want to be fair to James. On the one hand, the point that more people think they'll be affected than actually will be is a completely fair one. That's almost certainly true. On the other hand, you're running together the two terms, cost of living climate crisis, as if they are one thing.
They are.
They are not. And indeed, they may be in tension. Certainly in the immediate term, if you say to a householder that they have to lose their boiler and have a heat pump, if they say they have to lose the car they bought relatively recently and have a new one, or to pay for, or 2015, depending on what kind of car it is. Then, there may well be a conflict between a person's cost of living and the climate crisis that you identify. You can't just claim it all runs together.
As a macro thing, it certainly does. Part of the reason why food costs are higher is because of poor harvests that we had from the Spanish heat wave. I mean, these things are very much related. Part of the disruption to supply chains we're seeing, part of what I was talking about earlier about...
I thought it was Brexit that you blamed before.
Shush, I was delighted to hear him blame the Spanish, because people always blamed it on Brexit. So I'm very pleased to hear you say it was the Spanish heat wave.
No, well, the Spanish heat wave is certainly one of the things. And part of our supply chain problems was to do with difficulty moving goods around last year in Germany and China. These things absolutely are related, and I think if this is the dividing line the Tories want to have for Labour, that's actually good for Labour. Just wait, let me make this point, because at the moment the Labour strategy is otherwise to have no dividing lines, which means the Tories will get to set it closer to the time.
James, don't you think that the ULEZ point shows that in some communities at least, people will think that we've effectively, just put it bluntly, we're advancing, whilst people accept the need to address the climate issues, we're advancing on it too quickly?
Yeah, I think people just want a clear choice, actually, don't they? They want an alternative, because at the moment we have a uni party. They're all basically, I think, Greta Thunberg in disguise.
Oh, if only.
Do we have...
I was trying to ask James was, I think people have the sense they would like to do something to help the environment as long as we're not too hair-shirt about it. If you make it easy for people to recycle, they'll do it. If you tell them they have to put a hole in the wall, take out the boiler and stick in a heat pump in every house, they think to themselves, this is going too far.
10 grand. 10 grand sort of mistake. And the SNP today are saying you cannot sell a house. And actually bring a law. You can't sell your house unless it has a heat pump. A £10,000 penalty to every homeowner. That, I think, is punishing punitive politics. And I think if people were given the chance to vote, they would choose.
But I want to know what James thinks, because it seems to me some of these policies are punishing the least well-off in society. And normally the left-wing position would be to be in their interests.
No, on the ULEZ, for example, with the terribly named ULEZ, which has had bad comms and bad rollout, for example, that policy, I think they should have all of the money that's raised from it should go into a scrappage scheme, which should go from the bottom up. So,
because at the moment it's just going to TfL, isn't
it? Right,
yeah,
precisely. So that should, that 200 million that raises, that should go to a scrappage scheme from the bottom up, from self-employed and lower income. So for them, it isn't presented as a cost. This is, you can upgrade your car.
Yes, but you see, so I like that. And the Labour Party would be in a better position if you were advocating that. But sadly, you are not. And the argument between the Labour Party is advancing the scheme, as Sadiq Khan says, unchanged, or thinking again and not expanding, which is the Starmer position. Which one is your position?
OK, guys, we have to move on there. Excellent debate. Again, both sides put across. And that's a great idea, I think. More carrot and less stick.
Completely right.
That people the option of that, they will go for it. That's the end of that debate. Now, let's have a quick look at the weather. Are we all going to burn?
That warm feeling inside. From Boxed Boilers. Proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
Evening, I'm Alex Deakin and this is your latest weather update from the Met Office for GB News. Most of us will see some sunny spells tomorrow, but there'll still be a few showers around and still a little bit on the chilly side. Low pressure is edging away. The breeze is coming down from the north. These weather fronts have been providing some heavy showers, but clearing away from the south coast this evening. Another one will bring some showery rain into northern Scotland overnight. A few scattered showers elsewhere, perhaps in southwest England, southwest Wales, but most will be dry and clear. And temperatures will drop away down into single figures, certainly in many rural spots, towns and cities generally about 9 to 12 Celsius. So, for Tuesday, as I said, a mix of sun and showers, generally a brighter day across East Anglia and the south east. Not too many showers here in the morning. Mostly across western Scotland initially, but we'll see a few more showers through the day over parts of southern Scotland and especially northeast England, where we could see some heavy ones. Parts of Wales and southwest England should see lengthy, dry, bright periods, and temperatures in the southwest maybe up to 21, perhaps 22 in London. Elsewhere, again, we're mostly in the high teens, but the breezes will be lighter. Quite a chilly start to Wednesday, for many a fine bright start. Some showers again over northern England, but out west the cloud is gathering and we will see outbreaks of rain pushing in here as we go through the afternoon. Sunny spells and a few scattered showers elsewhere, and again temperatures mostly high teens, low 20s at best.
That warm feeling inside. From Boxed Boilers. Proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
Up next, the Labour Party has pledged to make self-identification easier if they win the next election. Do you think the Tories should be fighting culture wars to maintain power? Stay with us.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the Live Desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Dewbs and Co, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates. Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed. So I guess they've always been quite woke. That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. That's Mark Dolan Tonight, Friday, Saturday and Sunday from 9. Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Like all families, we have arguments every now and then, but actually we agree on what the mission of GB News is, and that's the most fundamentally important thing.
GB News provides the kind of platform that lets all voices be heard.
We don't hold back. We're free to say what we really think.
Just because some people who live in a tiny little Westminster bubble think that their particular story is important, that's not the most important story for me.
And often there will be difficult stories, stories that you won't find on the establishment media.
Because what people think in the north of England may be very different to what they're thinking in the home counties.
We're going to carry on telling the world what life is really like for households up and down the UK.
We love to be in your car, in your kitchen as you're having your breakfast. Whatever you're doing, you are part of the show. If it matters to you, it matters to us.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. This is Dewbs and Co with me, Martin Daubney, keeping me company until 7 o'clock. PR consultant Alex Dean and former advisors Jeremy Corbyn, James Schneider. Been a very lively show so far, gentlemen. In fact, we got some great comments in on our last debate. Should the Tories ditch net zero to win the next election? Richard is very clear. This is a huge opportunity for the Tories and they must now seize it. Go full on anti-net zero and full throttle pro-motorist. Then Sunak could walk back into Downing Street at the next election. Whereas Dave says, I would not vote Conservative in the next election because they are socialism light, hardly any different at all from Labour. OK, that's great stuff. Let's move on to our next debate now, again about the Labour Party, because they are pledging to make gender self-identification easier if they get into power. And that's despite Keir Starmer saying the opposite, when this issue almost sunk the SNP north of the border after the law almost allowed double rapist Isla Bryson into a woman's jail. So is this a culture war the Tories should be fighting at the next election? James, I'm going to start with you. Keir Starmer seems to change his position on gender self-ID in the same way he changes his position on Brexit. First he's for it, then he's against it, and now the latest rule is basically we've got Annalise Dodds saying you can have one appointment with one doctor who agrees you have gender dysphoria and buff, you're a man or a woman, you can change gender. Why, I want to ask you as a representative of the left, why are the left so obsessed with trans issues when really it's like 0.5% of the population maximum for the sake of abandoning 51% of the population, women?
Martin, I think you're being very unfair to Keir Starmer there. I mean, he flips around on almost every issue. It's not only those two. And,
with friends like this.
And I would, I would turn it around. I don't think that the focus on, who's fighting the culture wars and so on generally comes from the left. It comes from parts of the right which are trying to basically let the political class off the hook. Because rather than talking about economic prosperity and why we don't have any, what's been going on in the last 20 years or so in our economy, they're trying to get us to talk about something which, as you say, is an extremely marginal issue. For me, if you ask me what's my opinion on the way in which it should happen, my answer is, I don't know. I'm not an expert in it. I'm perfectly happy to trust what they say on something which, as you say, is a small issue, and focus on all these other things that I think we should be talking about.
With respect, I didn't say it's a small issue, and I don't think it is a small issue. We're seeing the moment Labour losing women is trending, trans women or con men is trending, and the feminist movement is very, very angry at what they feel that women are being thrown under the bus. Well, Alex, you're ready to go. Alex, you've just been out campaigning. Does this issue come up on doorsteps? Are people actually concerned about it, or is it just a media thing?
No, it does come up, and I'm surprised that James gave what, for I say, it was a rather safe answer, ducking and taking on what I think is a really challenging issue. So for a long time, I've lived in south of the river. Indeed, for a long time, I lived in Elephant and Castle, where Tories are rarer than the elephants. But when I was going around Southwark and Vauxhall and Bermondsey, not natural Conservative patches, you quite often find women on the doorstep who say, I have never voted Tory. This next election is the first time I'd even think about it, because at least your party knows what a woman is. Right? And the idea this issue has no cut-through is, I think, wrong. And also the idea it's the fault of the right. I think it's for the birds. It's not the right who's been saying that men should be able to call themselves women and then go into women's toilets or changing rooms. It's not the right that's been saying men should be able to declare themselves women and go into competitive sports, potentially injuring people and certainly taking podium places from actual women. And it's not the right that have been saying simply by declaring yourself a woman, you get to have all of the experience that comes with a lived life of womanhood and girlhood. And we should, and not only can you say it, I am then obliged to at least pretend that I believe it.
And I'm not saying that's a valid point, Jake.
I'm not saying there's no cut through, because people are barraged in the media with an extremely strong focus on this issue, completely disproportionate to it. And in terms, when you say it's at the expense of feminists and 51% and women who are 51% of society, then why in polls are women more pro-trans than men? Because
who's polled?
YouGov run lots of polls on it, tracker polls. It's a consistent.
People on doorsteps that I speak to are very. Women are very concerned about it. They feel as though they're being erased.
So when the question, should the Tories fight on this? I don't care, because I'm not a Tory party advisor. But I think people at home, when they're watching it and when they see the politicians or billionaire media are pushing this kind of thing, or what statue is up, or what. Hold on. Let me say, you are being mugged off. You are being mugged off to let them off the hook, so we aren't focusing on the manifest failure that we have in the country to improve people's living standards.
So if that was the priority of the Labour Party, then why don't they focus on that and instead they're coming out these kind of issues which they know will be divisive?
So this is probably one or two lines in a policy document, probably that thick.
Annalisa Dawes today, it's 6 or 7 tweets from Annalisa Dawes, the main spokesman on it from the Labour Party. It's not right to say it's anyone.
Shadow Equalities Minister.
My view would be this: there are certain issues on which reality bites. ULEZ did in Uxbridge, and it saved the government a huge amount of embarrassment, losing a by-election in Outer London, the former Prime Minister's seat. Equally, I think this is one of those issues in the end where no matter what the dogma of trendy dogma and saying, I'm in favour of everything goes, this is something on which there is enough cut through now that if the Conservative Party properly embraces standing up for womanhood, it'll be a strong asset at the next election.
James, final word. Do you think that women are starting to abandon the Labour Party over the fact, as I say, many women feel that they are not stood up for, they're being erased, and they don't like it. And why should they like it? Their safety. The left used to care and nurture for women.
There is no evidence that women are more pro-trans than men, according to polling. If you look at how Labour is polling, this doesn't seem to be taking it. I'm sure people have very strong views about it. My point is, I don't think very many people, after when we have the next election, that we've been 14 or 15 years of falling living standards, that's going to be at the top of their agenda. And so yes, are the Conservatives going to push it? But they're flailing around for literally anything. Because would you want to go into the election based on the record of the last 14, 15 years?
It's not flailing to realise this issue has become increasingly salient in people's minds as more men pretending to be women, or more people who used to be men now identifying as women or have had some treatment are winning female sports, sometimes injuring actual women along the way. It's not flailing to recognise that issue has risen up the agenda. And I think that it's funny if you think about it. You know, since the dawn of time, women have been poorly treated in society and treated as if they are less than. I'm not pretending everything's right, but just when equality was in glimpsing distance, we've said suddenly, I as a man can now declare myself a woman and everyone has to pretend that I am, and I get all of the privileges of safe space and rights that a woman has. Sounds rather like the patriarchy to me.
Amen to that, gentlemen. Another fair and full balanced debate. Thank you for that. Well, coming up, the Orkney Isles are exploring whether or not to secede from the UK. Are we seeing the making of Orksit? That's coming right after the break.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dewbs & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by headliners on TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my new show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m, where real people get to meet those in power and hold them to account. Every week, we'll be hearing your views from up and down the country in the real world. Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it. So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things. We've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to Dewbs & Co with me, Martin Daubney. Keep me company until 7 p.m. tonight. My Manel, all-male panel, PR consultant Alex Dean and former advisor to Jeremy Corbyn, James Schneider. It's been a very spirited show so far. We had a debate on culture wars a moment ago, trans issues, got some great emails. I'll read a couple out. Judith, I would never, ever vote Labour whilst they spout this trans rubbish. I'm not a cis woman, I'm just a woman. And then Phil, Starmer is hanging on to the transgender hangers-on and they make him unelectable, certainly by women. Gordon has a bit of fun with his final comment. I can self-ID as a giraffe, but it still doesn't mean I can eat the leaves from a tall tree without the aid of a cherry picker. Yeah, Gordon, I can see what you did there. Let's move on to our final debate of the evening. So Orkney could be leaving the UK to become a self-governing territory of Norway. Orkney Council passed the motion allowing the island a future outside of Scotland and the UK. The islands are just 90 minutes from the British mainland, which wants to be Norwegian. So is this divorce the start of the UK becoming ever more fragmented? Alex, I want to start with you. It's a fascinating development, this. Yeah. And the reason that they're doing this is because they've been completely left behind by the North Sea oil policy. Bear in mind, Norway, which shares the same oil field, 300 miles to the north, has a hugely efficient and cheap state-run energy system.
And the biggest sovereign wealth fund in the world as a result.
Right. Meanwhile, Shetland is withering on the vine, and they're fed up of Humza Yousaf. They met him today, and I think they would have had a few stern words. But is this the sort of thing we should be doing? Well, I mean, or should we be cherishing? Like Orkney?
You know, if the sadly misguided people who have pursued the cause of Scottish independence have as net results for their activity losing the Orkneys from our country and attempts to send male rapists to female prisons, what a legacy that would prove to be. My answer to these guys would be, whilst of course you may expect me to play Rule Britannia and say never, 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 I'm actually more sympathetic to the notion that the Orkneys should have some kind of different governing process, given their status and situation, than other parts of our country. We don't pretend that the Channel Islands are part of Kent. They have a different system of ruling themselves, and and it might be that that's the right comparison rather than being ruled directly as part of Scotland. But, you know, what you've got to tell these guys is this too shall pass. Humza Yousaf and his party will not rule in Scotland for all time. In fact, James's party may well have a better chance at the next election than the SNP. So, and I, for one, because I'm in country first, as a unionist, I would welcome the defeat of the SNP north of the border, even though I'm a Tory.
James, turn to you. You might think, why are we doing a story about Orkney? But actually, this, if we pin it as a direct consequence of a part of the UK that's been left behind by this slavish adherence to net zero, because the revenue from North Sea oil is plummeting. Keir Starmer has said he wants to end all North Sea oil. Places like Orkney will be absolutely broke. Is there any more years of reserves do we have of North Sea oil? Enough to keep these people very, very rich.
7 years. 7 years.
7 years of a lot of money as opposed to 7 years of nothing.
I don't... OK, anyway, leaving that all aside, I believe in the people's right to self-determination. So in a kind of similar way to what Alex was saying, if they want to have a different system, then they should be able to have a different system. It should be incumbent on the British government and the Scottish government to try to work out an arrangement that they like. But part of the reason why we're having fracturing in the United Kingdom, if we look at it historically, what you see in Northern Ireland, in Scotland, in Orkney, to an extent, but a lesser extent in Wales, it's because the compact, which was based on rising living standards, is fracturing, which is why you see the rising up of people pursuing other strategies. Now, we might think that these strategies are likely to do well for the people there or unlikely to do well for the people there, but the reason why they are happening is because of overall failures within our national government.
Alex,
I agree with James's prognosis to an extent. If I think specifically about the example of the Orkneys, one of the reasons we disagree to an extent, but might be closer together than you think, is that if I accept your position that there's only a certain amount left in the North Sea and it's finite, actually, with new technologies and new explorations, you continually find the Permian Basin has been declared finished time and again, and it turns out there's more to be extracted than people ever thought. But let's say that you're right and that there's a finite limit. allowing new contracts and allowing new licences at least puts those facilities on a glide path which would provide Orkney, with its financial setup, with another generation of income from the North Sea, rather than the cliff edge which Keir Starmer's policies currently threaten it with. That's why places like the Orkneys are unlikely to embrace the Labour position, notwithstanding the fact the SNP is less popular now north of the border. It's not just the fact that 200,000 jobs are invested in the oil and gas industry in this country, which you might think traditionally the Labour Party cared about, but moreover, specifically in the Orkneys, they get a financial benefit that they will be deprived of by a cliff edge, rather than a gradual decline which another generation of licences would permit.
Keeping it going in another generation of licences is what guarantees the cliff edge. What creates that to not be a cliff edge is investing in another energy system which is going to take us forward after, let's even say it does last a generation, as Alex says. I don't think it will. I think it's half a generation. But at some point, there is a cliff edge.
No, I just want to be clear. I was accepting your premise. Even if it's half a generation of time, the income that it would yield gives you another generation of cash.
So the argument, and this is something that I do completely agree with Keir Starmer on, and you won't hear me say that very much, is that rather than investing in new oil and gas, we should be investing in wind in the North Sea, because the government is playing a big financial role either way. Take the Norwegian state oil company that you were talking about beforehand. It is currently invested in a £4 billion investment in a new oil and gas thing, which we are underwriting 3.5 billion of. But the argument there is we should be taking that investment underwriting that we're doing to build our new energy system, which we are going to need very soon.
Alex, don't you think a sensible Labour Party that supports jobs, that supports sovereignty, supports energy self-sufficiency, should look to places like Norway and say, look, they have a nationalised oil industry with cheap energy, that could be a Labour Party policy instead.
But the Norwegians are moving towards... Firstly, they had it set up and managed hugely better than we did with the Sovereign Wealth Fund and all of that stuff. But now,
I agree with that.
The Norwegians themselves are moving to having wind and other renewable energies because it's going to go.
If I had a time machine, would we have been better off having a Sovereign Wealth Fund started 2 generations ago, which would give us the biggest Sovereign Wealth Fund in the world? Yes, of course. But given we are where we are, my answer is that it's a false dichotomy to say, it's a false proposition to say that if we got the natural resources we have now, we should stop using those and switch to renewable energy instead. For the rest of our lives, at least, we're going to need both, especially if the alternative, realistically, is stopping having our own resources in the North Sea and buying it from somewhere else, buying it from our neighbours in the Netherlands, from the Danes, from the Norwegians, or from Russia, Ukraine, or the Middle East. Well, I would far rather we had our own rather than we bought in, because the alternative isn't suddenly having magic renewables generating 100% of our needs. It's buying it from elsewhere.
James, you must concur that renewables can let us down. They're unreliable. When the wind drops, the power goes off. When solar panels get too hot, we're importing coal from Colombia, from South Africa, from North America, from Australasia to keep power stations on when we need them the most. Isn't this symptomatic of a failure of renewables? We're starving places like Orkney out of existence to the point where they want to leave the United Kingdom. That shows to me it's symptomatic of a failure of an energy policy which cannot support provinces that are dictated to by the metropolitan people who agree with net zero. The consequences are things like this.
So you can't have, under current technology, 100% renewables because of the things that you're talking about, which is why nuclear, hydro and other things are necessary to balance the grid. Orkney, from where it is in the North Sea, could get those things from wind and possibly from hydro. So that is going to be the future. There is going to be use of fossil fuels to help get us from one situation to the next. But that's really where we have to be investing, because if you look at the fossil capitalist system that we have developed for 150 years and poured trillions of dollars globally into its infrastructure, that is coming to an end, either because of climate change, which I think that's what's causing it. But anyway, if you look at global reserves of oil, for example, we're talking 44 years. If you're talking gas, you're talking 48 years.
Okay.
This is coming to an end, and we need to build a new system and a new infrastructure.
Quick final word to you, Alex.
I think if you want to build, I believe we need both. I believe for the rest, even if it's gas as a bridging fuel, we're using fossil fuels for the rest of my life, whilst we have more renewables, which you and I agree on. But if you're going to make that case, you should make it on the principle, because if arguing of shortage will never really work. We've been talking about peak oil for 100 years. Over that 100 years, we've used energy more quickly than expected, and we've always found we've got more still left than we ever thought.
OK, guys, we have to leave it there. Thank you to my panel, Alex Dean and James Schneider. Up next, the one and the only Nigel Farage with an exclusive insight into that BBC apology. Thank you for watching Dewbs & Co.
The temperature's rising. Boxed Solar, proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
Evening, I'm Alex Deakin and this is your latest weather update from the Met Office for GB News. Most of us will see some sunny spells tomorrow, but there'll still be a few showers around and still a little bit on the chilly side. Low pressure is edging away. The breeze is coming down from the north. These weather fronts have been providing some heavy showers, but clearing away from the south coast this evening. Another one will bring some showery rain into northern Scotland overnight. A few scattered showers elsewhere, perhaps in southwest England, southwest Wales, but most will be dry and clear. And temperatures will drop away down into single figures, certainly in many rural spots, towns and cities generally about 9 to 12 Celsius. So, for Tuesday, as I said, a mix of sun and showers, generally a brighter day across East Anglia and the southeast. Not too many showers here in the morning. Mostly across western Scotland initially, but we'll see a few more showers through the day over parts of southern Scotland and especially northeast England, where we could see some heavy ones. Parts of Wales and southwest England should see lengthy, dry, bright periods, and temperatures in the southwest maybe up to 21, perhaps 22 in London. Elsewhere, again, we're mostly in the high teens, but the breezes will be lighter. Quite a chilly start to Wednesday, for many a fine bright start. Some showers again over northern England, but out west the cloud is gathering and we will see outbreaks of rain pushing in here as we go through the afternoon. Sunny spells and a few scattered showers elsewhere, and again temperatures mostly high teens, low 20s at best.
The temperature's rising. Boxed Solar, proud sponsors of weather